This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Tonight, we're diving into a topic that shapes every classroom, but rarely gets the centre stage. We're talking about oracy. Speaking, listening, communicating, the skills that unlock learning, confidence, and even democracy. So stay with me for the next hour as we unpack why oracy might just be the missing piece in education.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Well, good evening and welcome to the Late Late Show with me, Chris Wilkinson. And tonight's show is something that we perhaps don't talk about enough. And yes, the irony of me saying that isn't lost on me. We're diving into oracy, the ability to speak, listen, and communicate effectively. Now, some of you may feel that this word feels fairly new, especially if you're, beyond the a couple of years teaching, and you feel like you've heard all of the vocab you can possibly think of with relation to teaching. Then oracy comes on the scene, and you're wondering, is it a new phrase? Is it something that it is? But it's not one we've maybe traditionally used very often in, may say, for example, the staff rooms or curriculum planning. We talk about literacy and we talk about numeracy, and we know how important they are, but oracy, specifically oracy, well, sometimes it slips through the cracks. And yet when you stop and think about it, so much of what we do as teachers, as parents, as professionals is built on the ability to speak clearly, to listen properly, and to communicate with confidence. And when we talk about the big three in education, we always say reading, writing, and arithmetic. But it's become almost a cliche. And there's a growing call for that fourth R, and it's oracy. Imagine that. Oracy sitting proudly alongside literacy, numeracy as a core skill, something that every young person leaves school with. Not just the ability to read and write well, but the ability to talk and to listen well too. And here's why it matters. Recent research shows that nearly 40% of children are struggling to communicate at the level expected at their age. 40%. Now, that's not a small figure, is it? Or a minor blip. It's almost half of our young people. And if you think about it, those communication skills underpin everything else. If you can't explain your reasoning in maths, if you can't ask for help in science, if you can't tell a story in English, it all feeds into how well you learn and how confident you feel and even how you connect with other people. And let's be honest, oracy isn't just about school. It's about preparing young people for life. So we're talking job interviews, apprenticeships, university seminars, or even just being able to stand up in a meeting one day and present an idea. It's not crazy to think that they should be able to do that. And these are the moments that can change lives. And yet, if we're not prioritizing oracy, then we're potentially, holding young people back from those opportunities. Now, across this hour, I'm going to unpack the research, and I'll share with you some of the latest findings about oracy in the classroom today. And we'll think about the barriers, the challenges, but also the possibilities as well. And we'll look at how schools are trying to make oracy more central and how teachers are working well into the classrooms. And making sure that the lessons are packed with oracy and what more needs to be done. And I shall be throwing out a few debate angles, so if you are listening live, please feel free to join in. Or if you are listening back on the, whether it be Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts, please feel free to still join in the conversation. You can message me on X. You can, I'll be sending out a post show message, and you can join on with that. And my name is Chris _ W1987, and I'll also be retweeted a lot by or reposted a lot by Teachers Talk Radio. So you should be able to find me fairly easy after the show if you want to get joined in. Because it isn't just about me talking for an hour. I do want this to be a conversation, or I do want this to be something that we eventually hop onto at a later point as well. And if I get enough conversations back, I'll probably go ahead and do a part 2 on this. And please feel free for listening to feel if you want to join in. You can be a show part. You can be part of the next show. Please feel free to do so. Because I want to know what you think. And do we give enough Oracy attention in our schools? Should it be assessed formally, just like illiteracy and numeracy? Or would that risk turning something natural, which is the art of talking, into another stressful exam component? And I do think it's worth a talk around whether or not we should be formally assessing Oracy. Or should we, if we are to be observing other lessons, should we be looking out for Oracy? And should that be a determining factor as to how effective and how outstanding a lesson might be? I appreciate I'm using words like effective and outstanding, which is outdated compared to what the new Ofsted framework is. But of course, ultimately, that's what we're after, isn't it? We want it to be told that our lessons are outstanding. But of course, there's the workload question as well. Teachers are already under huge pressure. Is focusing more on Oracy just something more to add to that list? Or is it something that could actually make the classrooms more effective, make learning deeper, and dare I say, make teaching actually a little bit easier? I, by the way, just think that is the case. Just to give you a spoiler alert. So there's lots to unpack and lots to discuss. So let's settle in and please again send me your thoughts, and let's give Oracy, the forgotten R, the attention it deserves. So let's start grounding ourselves. And what do we actually mean by Oracy? Now, it's easy to think that it's just talking, just opening your mouth and saying something. But it's far, far more than that. It's about purposeful, structured talk. It's about the kind of communication that deepens understanding, that sharpens, thinking, that connects people together. Now, if you're a MFL teacher listening to this, you might find it easier to, or perhaps more difficult, but it's a natural part of an MFL lesson to have structured conversations because we're practicing our vocabulary. It's even easier if you're tutoring someone who's further down the line, because perhaps you can actually just have an actual conversation with them in French, and then you've got your Oracy down to a T there. But I actually think that is the case with any subject, and my subject in particular, politics. I think a lot of conversations we have are based on, say, current affairs, and I will sort of drop keywords in as we go along to make sure that the conversation isn't just about what a key figure said, but why that's relevant to what we're doing. And having that structured conversation is a way to facilitate their learning whilst they're just having a natural, fluid conversation. Now, Voice 21, the national Oracy charity, called it the literacy of speaking and listening. And I really like that phrase because if literacy is about being able to read and write, then Oracy is about being able to speak and listen, but with intention, with skill, and with confidence. Because Oracy is listening as much as speaking. It's reasoning, it's debating, it's presenting, it's collaborating. I mean, all these it's. It's the ability to respond thoughtfully, to build on someone else's point, or even respectfully challenge that idea. So important. Now, think about your classroom for a moment. Picture that lesson when you ask a student to explain their thinking out loud, because we like to think out loud, don't we? If we're doing an analysis question or evaluation question or something, we like to think out loud. If you're a maths teacher, you might work out the problem out loud. So it's nice to hear the students thinking out loud as well. And Have you noticed how often in the process of saying it that they actually understand it better themselves? I see it time and time again. It isn't just a way of show and learning, it's rehearsal for learning. It's practice. I call it being on the training pitch. We're on the training ground today. So let's get ready for the big day by talking through what we're doing. And rather than something using whiteboards, we encourage them to write on it. And one thing I might do using a whiteboard is ask them to write a word down relevant to, rather than writing the whole sentence down, I'll ask them to write a word down. And then once they've wrote that word, they have to elaborate on that by speaking. And it's part of the thinking process, isn't it? And yet we don't always give students the structured opportunities to practice it, even though it is really quite important. And like I said, whiteboards for me is a really good example of this. I'll also perhaps maybe get them to write a word down and then swap whiteboards, and then maybe try and get them to elaborate on what the other person was thinking. Now, so when I pause and ask students to turn to a partner and explain their answers before feeding it back, by doing that, the quality of what they then share with the whole class is usually much stronger. We've heard of think, pair, share. Of course we have. Well, that think, pair, share is Oracy is a big part of the pairing and sharing. Of course they have to think, and the thinking aspect of it then feeds into the pairing and sharing. And like I said, the quality of what we get is from the whole class is so much stronger. And the simple reason for that is because the act of putting into words forces them to order their thoughts. It makes them more precise, more logical, and of course more confident, which is the whole purpose of maybe the formative weeks, but then also later on in the year as well. But here's the problem, and here's another stat for you. Only 13% of schools in England have named an Oracy lead. 13% only have an Oracy lead, so I let that hang. That means in the vast majority of schools, Oracy isn't being given the same priority as literacy and numeracy. I mean, just think about that. Almost 9 out of 10 schools don't have someone whose role it is to champion speaking and listening across the curriculum. Now, you may say that we should all be Oracy leads, and that's very true, but the measurement of Oracy needs to be clear, and Oracy leads are there to do that, of course. And I actually think that if we don't quantify the amount of Oracy that we do, it has consequences. If no one is leading on it, if no one is responsible for shaping that strategy, then it often becomes a bit ad hoc. A bit of talk here, a bit of discussion there, but without that whole school approach, we know that makes a difference. Now, I'm not saying teachers don't value talk in the classroom. It's something that we're very, very, we love it. Of course we do. It's something that we're very, very passionate about. But when something isn't embedded into the school priorities, when it isn't tracked or supported, it risks being left to chance. And as part of my MPQ and leading teaching development, the one thing that I learned by doing this is that we need to, whatever strategy we need to do, we need to implement it. It needs to be part of the implementation process. And we need all of the vital ingredients in order to do this. And one of the vital ingredients, of course, is strategy. And, again, without that, it's been left to chance. And with the Oracy, leaving it to chance means some students thrive, usually the confident, articulate ones, who already have them skills from home or from, naturally, while others fall further behind. And I'm instantly thinking of the students in question there for me. I know who I'm talking about there. So perhaps when you're listening, you do too. So the question is this: what if we know that talking is rehearsal for learning? If we know that speaking and listening are fundamental life skills, why is it treated as optional? Why is it an afterthought in so many schools? And maybe more importantly, what would it take to change that? Should every school have a named Oracy lead, just as they have literacy and numeracy leads? Would that make a difference to how seriously it's taken? I'd love to hear from you on this one. in your setting, how is Oracy prioritised? Or is it prioritised at all? Do you see it woven into the lesson design and curriculum planning? Or is it more of a bolt-on? And what impact do you think it would have if we really give it the same weight as reading and writing?
At AQA, we work with the UK's largest teacher network to shape the future of assessment. With teachers for students, we ask questions today that matter tomorrow.
The 7,500 primary schools are already using Kapow Primary to boost confidence in teaching foundation subjects. Our expert-created curriculum planning, lessons and CPD are here to support and upskill you, whether you're a subject lead or classroom teacher. If you've got knowledge gaps in art, music, computing or beyond, we've got you covered. Head to kapowprimary.com and empower your teaching today.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles.
Welcome back to the Late Late Show with me, Chris Wilkinson. Now, let's talk policy. We're talking Oracy tonight, so let's talk policy. In 2024, the Commission on the Future of Oracy Education in England put forward a really bold recommendation. They said that we should make Oracy the fourth R, alongside reading, writing and arithmetic. Now, just sit with that idea for a second. Imagine Oracy embedded into the curriculum in the same way that literacy and numeracy are. Imagine Oracy assessed properly. Imagine it given equal weight, equal priority. What would that look like for you in the classroom? Would it transform the way lessons are taught? Would it give students new confidence, a new skill set, a new sense of themselves? Or would it simply pile more pressure onto students and teachers who already feel that the system is groaning under the weight of targets, tests and assessments? I say there's a balance there. I say there has to be a balance between them things. And because policy always cuts both ways, doesn't it? On the one hand, if you want something taken seriously, you put it into the curriculum. You make it statutory. You say these things. This matters, and therefore this counts. On the other hand, the minute you make something statutory, you're adding workload, you're adding paperwork, you're adding accountability. So which way does this balance fall with Oracy, do we think? Now, I know some of you will remember this. GCSE English used to assess speaking and listening. I say they used to only because I spoke to some of my colleagues today and it seems to have changed. I know the way GCSE English is assessed because we do it in my college, so I can't ever remember speaking and listening being a thing recently. I did check it out and it's not. So, we used to do this. We used to have speaking and listening. There was a component where students had to demonstrate their ability to communicate orally. But like I said, I think, by the sounds of it, it got scrapped. Now, here's the interesting debate. Was that a huge mistake? Did we as a system downgrade something, essentially by essentially taking speaking and listening out of the exam process? Or was it simply too complicated to assess fairly? Any English teachers, please feel free to chip in at any point. After I've published this, please feel free to chip in. I'm going to go back to my English colleagues and ask them that again, really. Was it too complicated to assess Oracy fairly or not? Because let's be honest, consistency has to be an issue when some things can be quite subjective. A student in one school might get a completely different experience to a student in another, not because anyone's doing anything particularly wrong. It could just be the case that teachers in one school have a completely different viewpoint as to what is considered to be good oracy and bad oracy than others. Of course, there's a standardized process, of course there is, but there's still some wiggle room on that standardization process. Now, like I said, one student might have that, so moderation can be quite tricky as well. And some argued it created inequalities. But here's my question: did the solution, scrapping it, actually make things worse? Because since then, speaking and listening have arguably slipped down further the gender. I mean, without formal assessment, have we, perhaps unintentionally, but still perhaps sent the message that it doesn't matter as much? And I do think about the knock-on effect. If a skill isn't assessed, if it doesn't appear in performance tables, if it isn't part of what Ofsted are looking for, what Ofqual are assessing on, then how often does it end up being pushed to the margins? And yet, if we all agree that oracies are fundamental for life beyond school, then surely it needs a proper place within our education system. I think for A-level, definitely. I mean, like I said, I do practice oracy with them in the classroom, but it could go beyond there. If you think about my subject, you've got politics students who, some of which go on to university to study politics. Politicians need to speak. They need to actually say words, and they need to communicate and articulate what they're saying. And they can't really do that if they don't have the practice to do that, I would say. So yeah, how often does it end being pushed to the margins? And yeah, if we all agree that oracy is fundamental, why doesn't it have a proper place? So let me throw this one out to you as you're listening tonight, or if you're listening back later. Should oracy be statutory? It's the very simple question, but perhaps maybe not one that can be answered easily. Should every student leave with oracy skills as part of their qualifications? Should we be saying, just as confident as we say, yes, every child should learn to read and write, that every child should learn to speak and listen well? Or, and this is the other side of the argument, do we risk turning something natural, something human, into yet another box ticking exercise? Do we risk making oracy or turning oracy into something artificial where students are performing for an examiner rather than developing genuine confidence and fluency? Again, I think there's a balance there, and it is a really tricky one, but it goes to the heart of how we think about education policy. And of course, there's a third way, which is somewhere in between. And it's about what gets valued. And if oracy isn't valued at policy level, it isn't going to get the attention it deserves. Now, this is a completely unrelated point, but there is a link, so please bear with me as we do this. When I'm examining politics papers, they could spell every word incorrectly. And yet, if I get what they're saying, if I can understand what they're saying, then I have to give them the marks, because one of the factors on the mark scheme is that spelling does not get in the way of what the candidate is trying to write. And I do wonder if there's an option with some assessments, maybe not all, but some, where we can have a similar thing, but in reverse. So rather than them articulate, they may not get marks down for articulating poorly, but they could maybe get extra marks for how well they speak. We do this in EPQ when they do presentations. We do give them extra marks for how they speak and how they address themselves, because it is a fundamental part. But could we not do that with coursework or some sort of work where they can articulate? I'm thinking coursework. In that sense, I did my sociology coursework when I was at A-level, and we had to interview people. And of course, the strength of the coursework was based on how well we spoke. So it is a thing that we did at A-level, and it could be brought back. And of course, I'm speaking as an A-level teacher, but I understand that you may be from all different sectors, and it's possible to bring that in. If you're a year 6 teacher, could it be used more in SATs? If you're a year 11, could it be a GCSE thing? So could we, instead of assessing them on Oracy, we could credit them for Oracy, or credit them for good articulation with their Oracy? I'm not sure if you understand what I mean there, and perhaps maybe I'm not making sense, but I'm just trying to find a balance between the hard left point and the hard right point about, or one's a clear-cut case, one's clear-cut the other. Maybe we can find something in between, and if we do find something in between, perhaps maybe we could positively frame Oracy in a way that encourages them to articulate better. Just a thought. Always just a thought. And, if Oracy did become the 4th R, could it be something, like I said, to do with positive framing rather than, a hard enforcement of it as well? But, how do we assess it? And could we design complete new qualifications? Could we take Oracy and the fact that we're going to start using Oracy, if we were to start using Oracy, as an opportunity to completely revolutionise qualifications? Like perhaps, I don't know, portfolios of evidence or recorded presentations, group discussions. Would we trust teachers to assess it fairly, or would we need external moderation? Now, obviously, with technology these days, we can record it, and external moderation would be no different to any other type of assessment. So I can't see that being a huge hurdle to overcome. But what about progression? How would you measure a year 3's ability to speak and listen compared to a year 10 student? What benchmarks do we use? Do we risk making too rigid, tick box, level by level ladder? Or can we create something flexible that still, quite carries weight? Let's not forget the international angle. So some countries' speaking and listening are deeply embedded into the curriculum. Students practice debating, public speaking, structured discussions in modern foreign languages. It's just part of the culture. Are we falling behind globally by not giving the same emphasis here in England? Now, I can imagine some of you are listening tonight nodding along, thinking, yeah, this is exactly what we need. Make it statutory. Give it weight, give it structure. And I can imagine others shaking their head and saying, oh, God, nothing, not another one, not another thing to assess, not another hoop to jump through. And, that's why I want to hear your thoughts. Message in, tweet us, as it were. However, usually get in touch, and you normally do quite well with this, when we speak about it. So please let me know what you think, and please feel free to get in touch as well. I'd love to hear what you think. If Oracy became statutory tomorrow, what would the impact be in your classroom? Would it feel like a liberation? Finally given the skills we know matter, the status that it deserves? Or would it feel like another burden, another initiative laid onto the pile? Because let's be honest, the policy decision does matter. If it stays optional, then Oracy risks being a privilege of the few, the students in schools that already value it, already invest in it. If it becomes statutory, then suddenly every child is entitled to it, and that could be a game changer. So once again, the question for you is this: should Oracy be statutory? Should it be part of every child's qualification journey? Or should it remain something we encourage but don't formally assess? I'll leave that one with you, so please message in and let's get the debate going.
At AQA, we work with the UK's largest teacher network to shape the future of assessment. With teachers for students, we ask questions today that matter tomorrow.
The 7,500 primary schools are already using Capel Primary to boost confidence in teaching foundation subjects. Our expert-created curriculum planning, lessons and CPD are here to support and upskill you, whether you're a subject lead or classroom teacher. If you've got knowledge gaps in art, music, computing or beyond, we've got you covered. Head to capowprimary.com and empower your teaching today.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
Guardian examines the results of a survey by Girl Guiding UK, which says that the majority of girls and young women in the UK alter their behaviour to feel safe. The results reveal rising fears of harassment, with many respondents saying they avoid public transport or change what they wear. 2/3 of the respondents say they have changed their everyday behaviour to try to stay safe, whilst 56% of the group surveyed, girls and young women living in the UK aged between 11 and 21, said they feel unsafe travelling by themselves. This is up from 45% in 2022. The survey, Girl Guiding's annual Girls' Attitudes Survey, found that 86% of the respondents have avoided going out after dark to stay safe, with girls of colour less likely to step out. The reasons given for changes in behaviour included to avoid being sexually harassed, to avoid travelling at night, and to avoid drawing negative comments from others. Girls with disabilities felt particularly unsafe travelling. The survey also explored misogyny in schools. More than one half of girls aged 11 to 18, 58%, said they had experienced male pupils making toxic comments, while 32% reported seeing a teacher or member of staff subjected to sexist or misogynistic abuse. 1 in 10 girls aged 11 to 16 said they do not feel safe at school, a figure that rises to more than 2 in 10 for LGBTQ+ girls and 3 in 10 for disabled girls. 1 in 10 also said they had intentionally missed school to lower the risk of sexual harassment, a figure that doubles for girls with disabilities at 21% and rises to 18% for neurodivergent and LGBTQ+ girls. 32% of younger girls aged 7 to 10 also said they had experienced a comment from boys at school that made them feel uncomfortable, while 17% said boys at school regularly comment on the bodies of girls and young women. Girl Guiding called on local authorities and schools to publish plans to tackle misogyny, and for politicians in charge of public transport to engage with girls over their fears and to make services safer. Full details of the survey and reactions can be found online. Sticking with the theme of changing behaviours, The Telegraph features an opinion piece by Sir John Townsley, CEO of the Gorse Academies Trust, which includes 15 schools in and around Leeds. Sir John focuses on the behaviours of parents, some of whom he says have brought behaviour in schools to tipping point. Sir John, in his 39th year in education, says there have always been challenges in secondary schools, but in the last decade, something changed. He says the change centred around a powerful minority of parents who are unlike any parents we have seen before. He goes on to describe this minority as dreadful parents who sidestep the reality of tough love. Sir John says these parents are not disadvantaged, but the negative impact on disadvantaged pupils is extensive and deep-rooted. In the piece, he goes on to link the decline in behaviour standards in some schools to the fact that we remain a country with a direct link between poverty and educational underachievement. He links the behaviour of some parents to disruption because he says they live in a world in which their children can do no wrong, where their children's disruptive conduct is defended at every turn. The same parents attack schools through formal complaints, freedom of information requests and legal action. All of this, he says, has a devastating impact on morale amongst school staff and is at the heart of the exodus of great teachers and leaders. Sir John also says the reality is seldom talked about, but is now the greatest single problem facing secondary schools today. The full article, as well as comment, can be found on the Telegraph website or in Schools Week, which also reports on Sir John's opinion piece. The BBC reports that over 1,000 school children in Indonesia have fallen ill from free school lunches, in what authorities say is the latest in a string of mass food poisoning events. BBC Indonesia says that official figures show 1,258 victims of food poisoning linked to the country's multi-billion-dollar nutritious meals programme had been recorded in a 72-hour period. Earlier this month, 800 students from another province in the country had also fallen ill. The Nutritious Meals programme aims to offer free lunches to 80 million school children, but the mass poisoning incidents have led to non-governmental organisations to call for the suspension of the programme. A government minister for community empowerment said there were no plans to stop the programme. Victims of the latest outbreak complained of stomachache, dizziness and nausea, as well as a shortness of breath. Earlier incidents were said to be the result of negligent food preparation, including the use of expired sauces. Across the world, programmes offering free school meals to students have proved to be effective in improving health, academic performance and attendance. However, Indonesia's programme has seen growing food safety concerns and has led to anti-government protests. Further details can be found on the BBC Asia News website. Finally, the BBC's cyber correspondent reports that hackers say they have stolen the pictures, names and addresses of around 8,000 children from the Kiddo nursery chain. The gang of cybercriminals is using the information to demand a ransom from the company, which has 18 sites in and around London, as well as sites in the USA and India. The criminals say they also have parents' information, as well as safeguarding notes. Kiddo has yet to confirm the hackers' claims, but an employee said they'd been notified of a data breach. The hack is the latest in the series of high-profile attacks, including those on the Co-op and Marks & Spencer's. More details of this emerging story on the BBC World News website. This has been Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
Welcome back to the Late Late Show with me, Chris Wilkinson. Now, let's move on to Oracy, looking at it from a teacher's perspective. Because I've been waxing lyrical about why Oracy is important, and I've tried to balance it, but let's look at it from a teacher's point of view. So the research does show that most teachers don't get subject-specific Oracy training. Now, I know I haven't. I can say that categorically. And, you know, it's such an important detail because teaching Oracy isn't just about teaching English lessons. It's not just about drama or debating. Oracy cuts right across the curriculum. Now, if you think about it in maths, when a student's asked to explain their reasoning, to talk through the steps they took to, the steps they took to reach an answer, that's Oracy. Science, when students present their findings from an experiment, they have to justify why they reached a particular conclusion. That's Oracy. In history, when they debate whether or not a particular interpretation is valid, whether a source is reliable, again, Oracy. So here's the angle I want to put to you. Should every teacher across every subject be trained in how to support Oracy? Should we see Oracy training as a kind of universal professional skill like safeguarding or behaviour management, where every teacher, no matter what the subject, has the confidence to build it into their lessons? Or, as this is where the tension comes in, is it just another demand on teacher time? Another initiative, another expectation, another CPD session that risks adding to workload because we know how overloaded teachers already are. Now, some would argue that giving teachers proper Oracy training might actually save time, although arguably they may not have time to do the training in the first place. That's a different issue, whether or not, protecting teachers' time. I always say there's a good time for CPD, especially if it's going to save time in the long run and just create dividends on your class. So I'm just going to put that one to bed and say I think we should always have time for it. But of course, there will be the argument that they don't have time. But of course, by doing this, I advocate that it might be saving time. And if students are able to explain their ideas clearly, if they can articulate their thinking, if they can collaborate effectively in pairs or groups, doesn't that just make learning more effective and, essentially more efficient? Doesn't that help teachers assess understanding more quickly because you can hear it rather than having to decode it from a messy paragraph of writing? But on the other hand, if schools just add this onto their list without proper support, without space in the timetable, then again, it risks feeling like another thing being pushed onto us and something that is not always necessary. So again, I'm interested in hearing what you have to think. Should Oracy CPD be for every teacher across every subject? Would it improve the quality of teaching and learning in your classroom? Or would it be one step too far? Is it the straw that breaks the camel's back in terms of workload? Again, I don't think so. But please message in. I'd love to hear your take. Now, something worth talking about in addition to teacher training and workload is the loss of Oracy post-pandemic. And this brings me, or will segue me into a little bit of a conversation around social justice and democracy and the need for Oracy for all students in the classroom as well. Now, since 2020, teachers have been reporting that children's speech and language skills have worsened. In fact, 9 in 10 primary school teachers say it's harder than before to get pupils communicating at the level we expect. 9 in 10. So that's almost universal, isn't it? If 9 in 10 is practically a universal problem. And it makes sense though, doesn't it? I mean, think back to those formative years when children would be normally socializing in the playground, talking to their peers and playing imaginary games, picking up new vocabulary, learning the rhythms of conversation. Instead, those years were replaced with isolation, with masks, with Zoom calls, and just far too much screen time. Now, I actually think, I could be wrong with this about timing, but I actually think that this year's group, although it says 9 and 10 believe this, I actually think the year group that I've got now are almost the post-pandemic students. I do believe their Oracy is far greater than the last couple of years, and perhaps maybe that's it. But we know that young children learn through talk. They learn by listening, and copying and experimenting with words, being corrected gently and trying again. But if you cut off or limit those opportunities, then of course you're going to see gaps, and of course you're going to see delays. So, the question is, has the pandemic permanently set back children's Oracy, or are there simply more ways of doing this? And are we aware of the gaps now because teachers are paying closer attention, because Oracy is on the agenda? On the one hand, you could argue that yes, setback is permanent. If a child missed a whole year of practicing those conversational skills in nursery or reception, that's the time you can't get back. And by the time they arrive in year 1 or year 2, they're behind. So not just in language, but in confidence, in social interaction, and the ability to join in with language and learning. But on the other hand, you could say no. These are not permanent setbacks. Children are incredibly resilient. Given the right environment, the right opportunities, and the right support, they can catch up quickly. And maybe that's what's really happened is that the pandemic has thrown into sharp relief issues that were already there. And maybe it's just made us more aware of the vital role of oracy. And here's the policy question. Should government funding for catch-up include spoken language support just as much as maths and reading? Because what we've seen in 2020 is a huge emphasis on catching up in literacy and numeracy, interventions, tutoring, funding targeted at phonics, reading programs, and maths recovery. But what about oracy? Where's the investment in structured talk, in speaking language and support, in giving children opportunities to rebuild the lost confidence? If we only fund catch up in reading and maths, are we missing part of the bigger picture? Because, here's the truth, oracy underpins other subjects. If a child can't articulate a sentence, how well can they write one? If they can't explain their reasoning, how well can they develop problem-solving skills in maths? Oracy isn't separate from reading and writing and reading and maths. It directly feeds into them. So, let's debate this. Has the pandemic left a permanent scar on children's oracy? Or is this something we can put right with the right strategies? Should spoken language support be a central part of government catch-up programs? Is there a danger that, once again, oracy gets overlooked because it's hard to measure, hard to put into a neat box, harder to evidence with numbers and graphs? So again, message in, love to hear your perspectives, and all the perspectives I get may be worth a follow-up show. And again, if you're listening thinking, I can join in with this, please get in touch. I'd love for you to be a guest on my next show. If you're a classroom teacher who changes, who's seen these changes firsthand, and are your students more reluctant to talk than before? Do you notice differences in vocabulary and confidence in how they interact with each other? Or have you found that children bounce back quickly once given the chance? I know the answer to my points, but what about you?
At AQA, we work with the UK's largest teacher network to shape the future of assessment. With teachers for students, we ask questions today that matter tomorrow.
The 7,500 primary schools are already using Capel Primary to boost confidence in teaching foundation subjects. Our expert-created curriculum planning, lessons and CPD are here to support and upskill you, whether you're a subject lead or classroom teacher. If you've got knowledge gaps in art, music, computing or beyond, we've got you covered. Head to capelprimary.com and empower your teaching today.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles.
Well, welcome back to the Late Late Show with me, Chris Wilkinson, and we're talking oracy. And we've talked about oracy from a teacher's point of view. We've looked at oracy from a policy point of view and discussing the possibility of oracy becoming the fourth R. And of course, we've discussed the balance between teachers' workload and the impact that oracy has on education. But I would like also to consider oracy beyond the classroom as well. And here's something that I find fascinating. And this sort of ties into the point about democracy and social justice. And I don't know if when people saw the post that I put out about this, that people were thinking, oh, what does he mean by democracy? How does democracy come into this? And perhaps I'm a politics teacher. Perhaps maybe democracy is something that I think about. But it is about society oracy. At least I think it is. Now, I did find something from the Commission on the Future of Oracy, and they argued that it's actually crucial for democracy. So my ears pricked up as soon as I heard the word democracy. And it's for tackling misinformation and even for preparing for the workplace for the future. And of course, the Department of Education is all about supporting future students and the workplace in the future. So we often frame oracy as something nice to have in the classroom, something that helps explain answers a bit better. And of course, I made that argument earlier, so I do believe that. I 100% believe that. But, you know, the argument is bigger than that, isn't it? And oracy could be the foundation of how we function as a society. Now, if we start with democracy, if young people leave school unable to articulate their views, unable to listen carefully to the views of others, and unable to debate respectfully, then how are they supposed to engage in democratic life? And perhaps maybe they're unable to look at or consider other people and other views, and they may become a little bit tunnel visioned as well. Now, this includes voting, campaigning, community action. All of this requires the ability to speak, listen, and persuade and collaborate. And without oracy, participation shrinks, and that really matters because we need more people communicating, more people participating as well. Now, the turnout rate, and this is a huge thing as well. So, the turnout rate for the 2016 EU referendum was around 69%, considering how much of an impact that is. Yet, that's all people were talking about. So, maybe when it came to making that decision, people didn't know because they didn't get involved in the conversation. They didn't know what it was that people were debating. Now, I'm not saying that is the case, but oracy will have an impact on that because maybe there's a lack of confidence in understanding the different views or not having the confidence to ask the question about what the views were and such. I don't know. I'm just saying it's a possibility, and that's just one example, of course. But of course, there's also misinformation as well. And we live in a world, especially social media, it's flooded with content, sound bites, deep fakes, AI generated stories. And if we don't equip students to question, to challenge, to reason out loud with others, then how are they supposed to cut through the noise? Oracy isn't about having a voice, it's about developing critical ears too. Being able to test arguments in discussion, to weigh up evidence, to spot when something just simply doesn't add up. Then, of course, there's the workplace of the future. We're already seeing AI tools take on a lot of these writing tasks when, that once belonged to humans, drafting reports, writing emails, even creating presentations. And much of that can be automated. But speaking, building trust in a conversation, persuading a room full of people with to follow your voice, that remains human. And if anything, in a world full of AI, and oracy could become the most human skill we actually have. And it's the one thing that we don't practice enough. So here's the provocation for you tonight. Beyond exams, beyond school gates, is oracy actually essential for democracy? Should we be teaching not just how to talk, but how to listen? How to disagree respectfully? How to have dialogue rather than just shouting matches? And what about the workplace? If we don't prepare students to articulate themselves face to face, are we setting them up to be replaced, to be overshadowed, or simply ignored in a world where machines can do the rest? Now, we're coming towards the end of the show, but I still would love to know how you think about this, especially if you're listening to this back. Is there anything in this aspect of democracy that rings a bell with you about how we can use oracy to combat the challenges that AI present? Do you agree that oracy is a civic skill as much as an academic one? Should we be treating oracy as a democratic right, something that every child is entitled to develop? Or do you think that's overstating the case? that democracy and society are bigger than what just happens in the classroom. So please message me with your thoughts. I'll give you my details again. So I am Chris Wilkinson on LinkedIn, but I'm also available on Twitter, on X, at Chris_W1987. You can also look for Teachers Talk Radio, where Teachers Talk Radio will regularly repost any of my material, which will give you the opportunity to either message, comment on the post, or you can directly message me on the DM options. That would be on LinkedIn or on X. Because for me, this is an interesting one, and it's most exciting, maybe one of the most urgent arguments I've said for a while, because arguments for Oracy and giving Oracy the chance and the attention it deserves is something that I'm a big, big advocate of. And you'll hear me say that time and time again. So we are nearly out of time, so let's wrap things up. So again, tonight we have looked at Oracy from many angles: equity, policy, the teacher's perspective, the impact of the pandemic, and even its role in democracy and the workplace of the future. And what strikes me is this: Oracy isn't just about better classroom talk. It's about giving every child the tools to find their voice, to listen with care, and take part in the world around them. Now, we've heard that Oracy can narrow gaps for disadvantaged students. We've questioned whether or not it should be the fourth R, alongside reading, writing, and arithmetic. And we've asked whether schools, already stretched, can realistically give it the priority it needs. Now, for me, the big takeaway is that Oracy matters beyond test scores. It shapes confidence, relationships, employability, and democracy itself. And I can't say just how much I find that is so important. And for my final provocation for you tonight, but maybe something to maybe take into a part 2 on Oracy at a later point. And, as you head into the rest of your week and as you head into the rest of the term, what's one small thing that you could do in the classroom or in conversations with colleagues to give Oracy just that little bit more space? Because even if policy is slow to catch up, practice can start tomorrow. And once again, I would love to stress that I would love to do a part 2 on this with your involvement. So if you're sitting there nodding or shaking to what we're saying, please feel free to get in touch, get on the show, and let's have a proper conversation. So thank you very much for joining me tonight, as always, on the Late Late Show with me, Chris Wilkinson. I will be on again in 2 weeks' time. The Late Late Show is covered next week by my good friend Toby Lancaster, and he will be doing some material, I'm sure, that's similar to what we're looking at. So please feel free to join in next week with Toby. And thank you very much for joining me tonight on Teachers Talk Radio. And as always, I'm Chris, and I'll be back again another fortnight with a discussion that matters to teachers. I'm not sure what that is yet, but please, if you think that it should be Oracy, let me know and get in touch. Please feel free to. And until then, let's keep the conversation going. Literally.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.